Lesson 5, Slim Authorization Service Providers. Okay, so this is actually probably my favorite lesson yet. So we're going to add more than just the service providers here. This is going to be a large overhaul of the architecture. So to start off with, we're going to install Illuminate/support, and then that's going to be version 7.0.0 as of April 2nd, 2020. And then we're going to do Illuminate/database, and then we're going to do newer than 7.4, just like that, and voila. Next we'll do a composer install. So what's the reason for this? Why are we adding Illuminate support and Illuminate database? Illuminate's part of Laravel, right? Well, later in this series of Slim Authorization, we are going to be adding the Eloquent ORM to interact with our database. That's why we're installing Illuminate database. To install Illuminate database, we require Illuminate support to be installed as well. Illuminate support just happens to have a whole bunch of really useful methods we can use in this tutorial. So we have to install this anyways to get the Illuminate database later on. So we're installing it now because it gives us some pretty cool stuff. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a whole bunch of helper functions. We're going to go to app/helpers.php to do that. So that's app/helpers.php. These are added globally. So to give you an idea, we are going to add these helper functions. To do that, we need to add this, or these requirements: Illuminate support array and Illuminate support string. So first, we're going to add this public function base path. Now I'm going to show you a few of these, and then I'm actually going to go to the GitHub repository for this project I'll link to in the description, and then grab the rest. So the first one is base path. Function base path, the parameter is going to default to an empty string. It's going to return the base path, or the path to deauthorize Slim for repository. Whatever your project is, this will get you the base path. Once we've added our base path function, we're going to add several more helper functions: config path, resources path, public path, routes path, storage path, and app path. Copy and paste those now. Those are all going to use base path and just prepend the given path the method references. Alright, so after we add all of those paths, we actually have to add some of the missing paths. A few of these paths we already have, like public, resources, app, but routes and storage and config. Route, storage, and config are the three directories we need to add. First we'll add routes. Within routes we'll add a new web.php file. Next we'll add storage. Within storage, we're going to move our cache directory. Our cache directory has our generated blade templates, and it caches them in raw PHP. We're going to move that to our storage directory. We'll have to update the reference to Blade's cache path in a bit. And then we're going to add a config directory. Within config, we're actually going to define a blade.php file, and this is going to be the configuration for Blade. We're going to say the cache path will equal the storage path based on the helper method, and then cache. The views will be the resources path, and then /views. And again, remember that the cache path is not really too important. So storage is kind of a good place to get that out of the way, but it's just cached, generated raw PHP. Whereas the views path is the .blade.php file. It's the PHP files with the .blade extension. They have .blade syntax, let's ultimately compile it down to these cached files in PHP. And currently, within our settings, we are currently setting our cache path and our view path to resources, views, and cache. We just moved our cache directory, but more than that, we're actually not using this anymore, because in a previous video, we made that helpers function. And our helpers function is down here. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to say config, and then we want to say blade.cache, just like that. And then we want to do views equals config blade.views, and get rid of that. Okay, so we're good to go there. To set up this functionality to use a config helper method, we're going to actually use a helper function. But first we need to create a config directory, add files. We're going to add blade and middleware.php. In middleware.php, we're going to return an array, and it's going to have air. The air is going to be the values that we pass, the parameters we pass to app add air middleware. Right now those values are resolved from our container via the settings key. We're going to copy those over, and we're going to call it actually air underscore details, and we're going to just copy and paste the values. Next we're going to go back to our settings, our middleware, and we're going to replace setting display air details, etc. with the config path. Again, this config path is not working quite yet, but that is a helper function we're about to add. After that, we can actually delete our settings. We no longer need to resolve our settings via container. We're going to use our config directory instead. So in bootstrap/index, let's remove the require settings line and no longer pass the container in to anything. So instead, Slim App Factory create can just accept an instance or a new container. Also notice all of the current require statements. By the end of this tutorial, our goal is to have all required statements, except one, moved to the public/index.php file. So to start off with, to get this goal achieved, we're actually going to move our vendor autoload away from our current bootstrap/index.php file, and we're going to put it inside of our public/index.php. We're going to speed up and do a few things. We're going to add comments to public/index, return app from bootstrap/index, and refactor the app run method execution from bootstrap to public index. Have a config public function, so this doesn't work yet. How do we get that working? Well, we need to go back to our helper functions, and we're going to go to this URL, and we've got die and dump, throw in, class base name, config, dataset, and data get. We're going to add these 6 helpers, but we're just going to copy and paste them. So here's the URL to get these helpers. The repository is open. You can view the rest of the code if you want to. You can see the code before I even have it up for YouTube tutorials if you want. But the point is, you can come here to copy it. That's what we're going to do. And then I will also post a link in the description to this file. So let's go down here, and starting at die and dump. Let's see. Okay. We're going to go back to our helpers.php, and we are going to paste all of that content, all of those helper functions. So throw in person not allowed is true. So when person is not allowed, throw exception, person is not allowed. By default, it's going to throw this exception class. It's going to use the exception class to throw the exception. If you want to override that, you can do person not allowed exception class, and exception, like that. Usually I just stick with exception because you don't have to pass in that third parameter, and this is a very, very useful indentation saving function. So that's throw when. Class base name, say we have app/controller/welcome controller class, and it's actually going to be HTTP, and we said get or class base name. All it's going to do is it's going to return welcome controller. Just an easy way to get the base class name. Next, config. Okay, so this is where a lot of the important stuff goes on. Data get. Actually, let's cover data get and data set first. We'll come back to config because that's really, really important, and it depends on the data set and data get. So data set. Say you have a person. This person has a family. In his family, they have a cousin, and that cousin's name is Sarah. How annoying is that to try to set data? You have to do like person, dot. Ugh, it's ugly, right? Nested values freaking stink sometimes. This data set and data get is actually two of the global Laravel helper functions. So here's what they do. Data set allows you to decide on a target and then use a dot delimited string to set data. So family.cousin.name equals Timmy. That will set this person's family cousin's name to Sarah, or to Timmy, from Sarah to Timmy. The inverse of that, of course, is data get. If you want to get the person, you can do family.cousin. That will return the entire array. The cousin, that would return this. And then if you want to go all the way down to name, then you'll get Sarah at this point, or Timmy if you comment that out. Timmy if you comment that out. So that's data get and data set. The last cool thing with data get and data set is it works on objects as well. So if it's set up like that, and it's not a associative array, but it's an object instead, that still works. If person, family, cousin, name, well, you're still getting the name, and the name happened to equal Sam, then you'd get Sam. And you don't have to set it, that's just showing you what the value would be. So that's data get and data set. Config uses data get and data set along with some PHP find file functions to aggregate all of the config files from here. Blade, middleware, any files we add here, first off, must be PHP. Throw when the file is not a PHP extension file. Config files must be .php files. Files stored here must be PHP. It will aggregate all of the files using the file name as the key and then the values as whatever it is. So if we do config and then we do blade dot cache or views, this works. You can also do blade views. You'd also do middleware dot error details dot log details, or whatever it is, and you can nest it as far as you want, as long as it's just a PHP file with a nested array. So you can keep going down and doing that. Does not accept directories though. So yeah, that is the config. And then the last one is die and dump. This is just easy debugging, simplifies everything, gets you the information you need. As an example, if we go to bootstrap/index and we did die and dump the config middleware, we can go to our browser and it will dump out the config middleware data, and then it will die. The application will kill itself or quit running wherever we run this. It will dump and then die, aka die and dump. So that is our helper functions in a nutshell. Okay, so what do we need to do to finish cleaning everything up? How do we create service providers? How do we get our routes over here? The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to copy our routes right here. We're going to bring them over here. Next, we're going to change some stuff up. We're going to say, okay, welcome controller at index, and welcome controller at show. Of course that will error out right now. Of course that will error out. To set up this pattern, instead of doing the array, we need to set this up. We need to do route get and route get. So we're just going to create a static wrapper around, we'll delete that route for now, a static wrapper around the app definitions, the app route definitions. So we're going to create a new app support route. Okay. So to get this set up, we're going to do new directory support, new PHP class route. Within our route class, we're going to do protected static app, public static function setup app, and we're going to reference app for a lot of these functions we're about to set up. We reference an app using ampersand. The reason we reference an app or reference any variable is because we don't want to copy it. We just want to point at it. We don't want to slow things down by copying it everywhere. Okay. Next, we need to make that public, and we need to do self app equals app return app. Okay. So we're setting up the route by passing it the app. After that, we need to add this call static magic method. This is going to accept the route verb as the method name, and then any parameters we pass through with the method name. This will either be a string or an anonymous callback function. So all we're going to do is we're going to say the app is the static app we already will set. Then we're going to deconstruct the parameters that are passed with the verb, the route definition. So it would be like app get and then route and then either function, or we're going to do welcome controller at index. So it's going to be a string, and here we'll line that up below. So that's how it normally looks. We're just setting that up as variable. So we're going to say app verb route action. And so that's what we're getting from our static or call static method. Verb and parameters. Parameters are going to be this, the parameters passed into our app via whatever method we call that happens to be an HTTP verb. Okay, so we're going to say route action equals parameters. Deconstruct the route and the action from the passed in parameters. Next, we're going to do self-validation against the route verb action. To validate, I'm going to simply say, okay, accept the route verb action, route verb and the route action, and then we're going to say the exception is unresolvable route callback / controller action. Then we're going to say the context of the exception will be the JSON encoded array, associative array of route, action, and verb. We're just getting the context, so if there is an error, we can pass all the information to the front end, making it easier to debug. And then just JSON encode, not encoded. After that, this exception fails when is callable action. So if it is a callable action, or is a string action, and the string, we're going to need to import Illuminate support, is or includes the @ symbol. Okay, and then we want to say if neither of those are true, if it's not callable, if it's not a callback function, and it is not a string, aka a string that includes the @ symbol, then we can't use it. We don't know how to resolve it. So it either has to be welcome or controller at some callback method on the class, or it has to be an anonymous callback function with the request, response, etc., etc. Has to be one or the other. Anything else will throw an exception. So we'll say throw when fails exception dot context. Okay. After that, if we pass validation, we need to return the app definition. And so that is going to be return is callable. If the action is callable, just return the app verb and then pass through the route path with the callback function. Otherwise, we need to pass through or return the app definition based on the verb with the route it maps to, and then we need to return controller method, right? We need to break up home controller at index and make it app slash http slash controllers slash home controller and then index. So that's what we're trying to do here. We need to get the controller class path and the method on the given controller that we're trying to call. And we're parsing that again from home controller at index, just to make it a little cleaner. So we're going to add a self-resolve via controller action. So if it's just a callback function, we just give it the callback function. If it's not a callback function, and add that as static, then we need to do public static function resolve via controller action. We do class equals string before the action at, so again, home controller at index. This is what we're working with. That's what the action is. The class is going to be the before the at symbol. This is action. We want to get the content before the at symbol on action. That's going to be home controller. Next, we want to get the method. We want to say string after the action at symbol. That's going to be the index section. After that, we want to get the entire controller class path. So we have the base class. We want the full path. To do this, we're just going to use our config. We're going to say routing.controllers.namespace.class. Finally, we're going to say return controller method. So what this is going to end up equaling the controller is going to be like /app/http/controllers/home controller, right? And then when it's all said and done, we're actually going to be returning this. Controller path, the controller class path, and the method on the controller we're calling. That's what this will return. So it's just app, get, post, delete, option, whatever, route, /home, /user, /ID, and then the controller and the method we're returning. Pretty simple once you wrap your head around. I'm sure going this fast probably doesn't help though. My apologies, I just don't want this thing to take forever. Okay, so now we have that set up. We are good right there. We still need to set up our routing config file. Our routing config file is going to have routing.php. That's going to return controllers and then namespace. And that's going to be /app, /controllers, /http /controllers, and then finalize it with the final /. Routing.controllers.namespace, routing.controllers.namespace with the given class. So now in routes, when we pass through welcome controller, we're actually referencing our controller's directory. Then the at index will reference the index function right here. Okay, so how do we apply that? Well, let's do this. Let's actually set up what this video is about, our service providers. So first we're going to do a providers directory. This is going to be a service provider base class. Then service provider, we're going to make our class abstract, meaning you cannot directly instantiate it. Once we have set up an abstract class, we want to use our slim app. By using our Slim app, we can set a reference to the given app. Sorry, we can set a reference to our app on the given service provider. We're going to have multiple service providers, and we want to just reference the app. Again, we don't want to clone it. We don't want to create it. We just want to reference it. We're going to say this app equals app, and then it's going to be a public app construct, public function construct. We're going to do final construct. There we go. Final just says that you can't override or use polymorphism on the constructor. This is the last time you'll be able to use the constructor. Child classes of service provider cannot define their own constructor. After that, we're going to add two abstract public functions. The first is going to be register. Next, we're going to add a public boot function. So each provider will register. It will go through every single service provider we have defined to our application, and it will register each one of those. Once it's done registering, it will go through all of our service providers and run all the boot hooks. So they're just two global hooks that we can create several classes to run with. Finally, we need to add one last function, and that's going to be the final public static function setup. Setup is going to again reference the app, and it's going to reference an array of providers. Now, a lot of people may consider this not the best practice the way I'm setting it up, but it's clean enough where I like it. You know, you can't override it because it's final, it's static, so it's global, and it's just straight up clean. It's 3 lines of code. We're going to do provider equals new provider app providers. What are we doing? Well, app is obviously going to be the app we pass in. Whenever we pass in the app, we're going to have an array of service provider class paths. So that's going to be like route app slash providers slash router or route service provider. App slash providers slash air middleware service provider class, and app slash providers slash view service provider class. Just like that. So that's what our providers are going to end up being. And then in front of all these, we'll add a backslash, because we'll actually use this array in our config in a sec. So all we're doing is we're going through and we're mapping this array of strings to our classes, the path to our classes, and we're mapping them to the actual instantiated instance of the class. We have to pass it app, it uses the app to construct itself, and then we have an array of all of our service providers. After we have all of our service providers instantiated where they know about the app, we want to first walk through all of them, and we want to run the service provider function and tell it to register. It's going to iterate through all of our service providers and register each one of them. After it has run the register hook on every single service provider, only then will it reiterate, or will we reiterate over our providers and run the provider boot method. So we're accepting an array of providers, we're accepting the app. We're mapping through the array, or the array of class paths, basically. They're all class paths to service providers. We prove that here by enforcing that the provider is a service provider type. And then we instantiate them, we register them, and then we boot them. Pretty simple. Just have to look at it for a sec. All right, so we're going to copy that. We're going to go to config. We're going to make a new file called app.php. Then this, we're going to return app. And that's going to be the provider's path. Alrighty, so there we go. Air middleware service provider, view service provider, and route service provider. So let's start with our route service provider. And we'll do route service provider. This is going to extend from the service provider. Notice it gets a red squiggly. This is good. class must be declared abstract or implement methods boot and register. The reason it does this is because we declared these two methods abstract. It basically treats any children classes like it's like the abstract service provider class is an interface, and the child class is a specific implementation. It's enforced, contractually obliged. It has to have those abstract methods. So add them. Public function register. Remember, register comes first, and then public function boot. All right. Next, we're going to set up the route, use app support route, just like that, and then we will require our route's path using web.php, just like that. So we register the route facade, the static facade is probably not the right word. It's not the proper setup completely, but similar to facade. It statically accesses the app, but it needs access to this app. So it's not really a facade. It's more of a static wrapper to a literal sense. And then it requires the route paths within web.php. So route get welcome controller at index, route get name ID. Hopefully that shall work. So we can get rid of this now in our bootstrap/app.php. Next, let's create a new PHP class, and we're going to call it Air Middleware Service Provider. Again, it's going to extend the service provider, and then it's going to be forced to implement the register and the boot hooks. Public function boot, just like that. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say register this app, add Air middleware, and then we're just going to go over here, copy this config, and we're just going to register the Air middleware in the service provider. Then we're going to delete the middleware file altogether. Next, in our app.php, we will remove that right there, and then we will also get rid of this routes directory or file. Okay, so now we have properly refactored all of our callbacks to service providers and our config directory as the settings for those service providers. The final step is this. We need to actually run our service providers. We need to register them, right? We need to run them. How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple, right? We added a setup function. It's a final public static setup function. I mean, final. Come on, it's like dead giveaway. It's the final thing we need to do. No, kidding. Anyway, God, I'm so tired. Oh, it's okay. Setup, and then we are going to pass it the app, which is a reference to the app. We're going to go up here real quick. We're going to do use app service provider, and then we're going to do config app.providers. And then, because we're importing it right there, we are good to go. So it's going to be app is a new slim app factory. We create it with a new container. Then we're going to pass a reference to that app along with the list of the class paths to our app service providers. Again, our app service providers are defined in config app. Oop, my bad. Providers. It's going to have route service provider, Air middleware service provider, and for right now, we'll comment out this view service provider. And then it will just iterate through all the register methods, all the register hooks. Once it's finalized all the register hooks, then we'll go back through all the providers and hit all the boot hooks. Through that, we are requiring this routes path, which is the only place we should ever require a file outside of public/index.php. Routes are a unique exception. Then, in our routes file, we define the route, the controller, and the method on that controller. All controllers must be in the same place for this to work properly. And if you really want to and you don't like that app setup, you can still use app-get. this will still work. So if we did everything right, which who knows? No. Okay, so looks like whenever I was explaining this, the support route class, the static wrapper, I added this app get. So the reason it wasn't working was because it was going through that and trying to register that route multiple times. We don't need it at all. Joke's on them, and it works. So in final, we have our route that can get the path, reference the controller and the callback. We have our error middleware. We have our route service provider. The service provider will automatically register or loop through any register and boot hooks on all of our service providers to add our service providers to the list that needs to be looped through or implemented, the providers, the services we need. We just go to config/app providers. And then behind the scenes, something that the front end dev, the people that mess with it after the architecture's solidified, never have to see is that behind the scene we're just running this setup app. And then we're just passing a config of class paths, and those class paths just happen to all implement the same class. The last thing I want to show you guys is how you can use your providers to hook into the service container. So to do this, actually this is a pretty good example. We're going to refactor our global view helper. So our global view helper is this. That's this right here, right? So our view helper function will render a blade template. So we're going to completely remove that. We're actually going to cut that out. We're going to create a new PHP class and call it view service provider, maybe even blade service provider, just like that. And then we're going to say it extends the service provider. And then we're going to say public function register, public function boot, and we're going to add actually a new support class. We're going to call this, okay, this is going to be a pretty higher level thing right here, but it will take less than 5 minutes. So what we're going to do is, currently we have this function, right? We have this, I'll get rid of this function, this view function. It returns a blade template based on a .delimited path and with optional content we can inject into the template. To create a blade template, we need to use blade from Yesengers. That's lesson 2, I believe, in this series. And we need to use the response interface, which we use as response. The thing that sucks about this function right now is that whenever you return a view, you're returning something to the front-end user. You know, really all we should need to pass in is template and width. But because Slim's a stricter framework, we're having to pass in response, template width, or we're having to do response, get body, right, view, template width. It's a response that we're writing to the body every single time. Whenever we return a view, it's always going to be a response, and it's always going to be written to the body. So we want to get rid of having to do that, and we want to get rid of having to do that. All we want to do is this. We just want to say, return the view with the template and the content associated with the template. So how do we do that? Well, check this out. We're going to create this class. This is going to be a public function construct. We're going to say response factory interface factory. We're going to say this response, which we're going to set up here as public response, is going to equal the factory create response, the factory created response, which is a 200 success. Okay. Next, we need to use response factory interface, just like that. And then finally, we need to say response interface, just like that, or maybe response factory interface. Or maybe we'll just get rid of the type on that. After that, we will go down here and we'll say public function invoke string template equals that array with the variables we'll inject into the given template, and then we're going to require that the return value is a response interface. Just like that. After that, we're going to say this response gets the body, and then we are going to write a new, actually here, let's do this. This will help. We're doing this. We're copying this function, we're putting it in the invoke. The only difference is we're referencing this response and returning this response. So we're just using the view function again. So the question is why? Why do we do that? Well, notice that this invoke magic method, it only requires the template and the with method now. So what we can do is we can do view equals new view, and then we could do like response, new response factory, and then we could do, I guess all we need to do is pass in an instance. New response factory, right? Then below that, we could call the class instance of view as a function. The reason we're able to do that is because of the magic invoke lets you anonymously call as a callback function. You can call an instance, it's a function. And then you could do auth.home, and then you could do name equals clean code studio. Just like that. So whenever we have a new instance of this, of view, we can just use the instance as a function and we don't have to pass the response. You know, that's not a huge benefit, right? Well, check this out. Because we have dependency injection set up, we can actually go to our Blade service provider. We can reference this app, get the container for this app, and set the key of view class, use view, to a new view that accepts a new response factory. So now we can automatically resolve an instance of view from our container. So to bring this round circle, and if you didn't follow this through all the way, I'd really highly recommend watching it a few times because this is really, really important stuff. I mean, once you understand this, it's huge. But now, within any one of our route actions, controller or anonymous function, we can use view, and we can say, okay, view. This will automatically give us the return value from our container with the key of view. It knows to get view from the container, key, resolve based on key. It knows the key is view because the type of this variable is view. So view is the key it's using to resolve this variable from our container. When it resolves the app container's view key, it just calls this function. This function returns a new view class that accepts a new response factory that, again, has a public magic invoke function that lets us call the given instance as a function. And so now what we can do, I don't know what I did there. There we go. So now what we can do, because we're getting an instance of view, is we can just do return view auth.home, and then we can do name equals clean code studio, just like that. And we can actually get rid of response too, because view itself is a response. And then show can be return view auth.show or user.show, whatever the path is to your given Blade template. And then you can do compact name and ID. Compact name and ID is the same thing as name equals name, ID equals ID. So instead of setting up an associative array and duplicating keys and values, you can just do compact name and ID. Do view, remove the response, return that, And then up here, you can do name equals Clean Code Studio. And compact the name, just like that. And now that that is set up, we can go back here. We can do name, and then we can do example, name, ID, or welcome, name ID. And then finally, because all of this is set up, we can uncomment our view service provider, and we actually called it Blade service provider, and that'll work, hopefully. No. Welcome Zach 5. Okay, so this is actually working, but user.show, message view user.show not found. So what we would need to do is go to resources, views, new directory, user, new file, show.blade.php. We'll just copy over this baby, and then we'll do h1, welcome, user, small, your ID is ID. I'm not sure why you'd want to tell anybody their ID, but who knows. And close that out. So now we have user show.blade. Hello, world of Blade. Okay, undefined variable user. Ooh, I meant to say name. Reload the page. Hello, world of Blade templates. Welcome, Zach. Your ID is 5. So guys, that is probably way too long of a video, way too detailed. A little biased in how I set up applications and how much I really like Laravel probably showed through. But other than that, I think it really shows a lot on what you can do with setting up providers, setting up service providers, and dependency injection, and a config directory, and just really setting things up to be extendable, but also just not be so cluttered, just making it more enjoyable to work with, even within Slim. There's always ways to get around things you don't like. Personally, one of the things I don't like is having to do apt-get /route/name function and then type in the request and the response and anything else I need. Like, I just want to say response request, and I want to enforce it behind the scenes because it's a route, it's an entry point, and it's going to return something. Like, sure, there's always going to be requests, and it just doesn't make sense to me to have to always define the entire type with everything you need when you don't use it all the time. So this is a really cool way to kind of get around some of the verbose coding without using any of the and losing any of the enforcement. So view is still a type of PSR response interface. That's why it succeeds. If you go back to view, it does return the response interface. So it still works, and if you want to get the normal response, you still can. You just don't have to say it every single time. Like, some things should just be what they are through context. You don't have to go overly verbose on it. But I don't know. I'm ranting at this point. Anyways, guys, that's all I got today. That was setting up and refactoring Slim to really, really clean things up. Next time, we're either going to get onto Eloquent, or maybe I'll take a break from the PHP side and we can start setting up the login and authentication forms. But yeah, guys, that's all I got. This is Zachary Warren with Clean Code Studio, Clean Code, Clean Life. If you liked this video, this was helpful, if you learned anything in any way whatsoever, like and subscribe, and I'll keep them coming. Thanks again, guys. Simple.